So what I found is that the book by Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Kelly, All Things Shining, reading the Western classics to find meaning in a secular age, has direct bearing on my project of trying to re-understand, reimagine what is meant by Henry Corbin's Imaginal in the context of a sort of Vivekian prescription for response to meaning crisis and meta crisis. And so I've decided to include some of All Things Shining here. And I'm going to begin somewhat counterintuitively with chapter 3 because that's what I feel is relevant. And go read it yourself if you want the first two chapters. It's just a book. Just a book, they say. Homer's Polytheism. And we get a quote from Stanley Kubrick, the script for his film Eyes Wide Shut. Alice to her husband. One night in the dining room, there was a young naval officer sitting near us. Just the sight of him stirred me deeply, and I thought if he wanted me, I could not have resisted. I thought I was ready to give up you, our child, my whole future. At a lavish dinner party to honor their guest, Telemachus, before her husband King Menelaus, and the full complement of his Spartan aristocrats, Helen tells a sensational story. It's not a story of heroism. Rather, the most beautiful woman in the world describes how long ago she left Menelaus and their young child to run off with an irresistible houseguest named Paris. Yes, that Paris, the one whose dalliance with Helen began the Trojan War. An odd choice, you might have thought, for dinner party conversation in the Menelaus household. Perhaps the most shocking feature of the scene, however, at least to us moderns, is that nobody at the party is shocked. Indeed, there's a stunning lack of moral outrage on display. Moreover, Homer's unqualified admiration for Helen is apparent. In his version of the story, not only is Helen back with her husband, playing the part of the perfect hostess and wife, but Menelaus himself even congratulates her. Quote, an excellent tale, my dear, and most becoming. A similar erotic triangle could occur today, but Stanley Kubrick's exploration of the husband's shocked response couldn't differ more. What accounts for Homer's treatment of the scene? One might try to attribute the whole scandalous episode to the fact that Helen has slipped drugs into everyone's drinks, which she has. This might explain Helen's magical effect on her guests while nevertheless allowing them to remain recognizable moral agents. Sorry. But this explanation would leave us unable to account for Homer's own later comment on the situation. When Menelaus went to bed that night, according to Homer, quote, beside him lay Helen of the light robes, shining among women. Homer's admiring characterization of Helen, daughter of Zeus, suggests that his understanding of human action and existence is radically different from our own. It ought to inspire us to delve deeply into Homer's understanding of what it is to be a human being. Rather than trying sympathetically to understand his admiration for Helen, however, readers and commentators since ancient times have taken it to reveal some deficiency in Homer's view of morality and moral responsibility. Helen seems both to deny that it was wrong to abandon her family and run off with Paris, and also to refuse responsibility for the act, suggesting that Aphrodite, the goddess of erotic attraction, made her do it. Concerned by the possibility of such a twofold dodge, even ancient readers of Homer, though they admired him, sometimes felt compelled to correct his account of Helen's role in the Trojan War. On some alternative versions of the story, for example, Helen is made to pay a debt to society. Contemporary scholars have been equally unable to take seriously Homer's treatment of Helen. Either they fail to discuss her case at all, or else they take it as further proof that Homer has a primitive grasp of moral concepts. Indeed, perhaps the three most influential interpreters of Homer in the 20th century, Bruto Snell, E.R. Dodds, and Bernard Williams, argue that Homer failed to understand the great moral insights, respectively, of Kant, Hume, and Nietzsche. But what if they're wrong? What if Homer's understanding of human existence is in fact more profound than ours, rather than less? And what if Homer's admiration for Helen is the entering wedge into this profound world. The episode that sympathetically understood opens up Homer's whole understanding of the sacred and its importance in human life. Indeed, Homer's world should neither be patronized as primitive with respect to our modern philosophical and psychological notions of moral agency, nor be celebrated as somehow standing at the origin of our now more fully developed Western culture. Rather, we must recognize that our modern attitudes and philosophical theories have concealed the real attractiveness of Homer's view. Instead of smugly interpreting him using our modern conceptions of human being, we must read him as an artist, sensitive to positive phenomena of existence that we have long since lost the ability to see. We must read him as an artist sensitive to positive phenomena of existence that we have long since lost the ability to see. The Homeric Greeks were open to the world in a way that we, who are skilled at introspection, apparently, and who think of moods as private experiences, can barely comprehend. Instead of understanding themselves in terms of their inner experiences and beliefs, they saw themselves as being swept up into public and shareable moods. For Homer, moods are important because they illuminate a shared situation. They manifest what matters most in the moment, and in doing so, draw people to perform heroic and passionate deeds. The gods are crucial to setting these moods, and different gods illuminate different, even incompatible, ways a situation can matter. The goddess to whom Helen was most attuned was Aphrodite. She illuminates a situation's erotic possibilities and draws one to bring these out at their best. Achilles, by contrast, is sensitive to Ares' mood, an aggressive mood, in which opportunities to shine as a ferocious warrior become the most important aspects of the situation at hand. Other gods call forth other attunements. The best kind of life in Homer's world is to be in sync with the gods. As Martin Heidegger puts it, quote, "We are thinking the essence of the Homeric Greek gods, if we call them the attuning ones." We are thinking the essence of the Homeric Greek gods, if we call them the attuning ones. At the center of Homer's world, then, is the sense that what matters is already given to us, and that the best life is the one that manages to get in sync with it. This vision speaks eloquently to our own modern needs. Homer's Olympian gods give his Greeks a sense of the sacred that underwrites the joys and sorrows of a truly meaningful existence. To lure back these Homeric gods is a saving possibility after the death of God. It would allow us to survive the breakdown of monotheism while resisting the descent into a nihilistic existence. Homer's epic poems brought into focus the notion of arete, or excellence in life. That was at the center of the Greek understanding of human being. Many admirers of Greek culture have attempted to define this notion, but success here requires avoiding two prominent temptations. There is the temptation to patronize, that we have already mentioned, but there is also a temptation to read a modern sensibility into Homer's time. One standard translation of the Greek word arete as virtue runs the risk of this kind of retroactive reading. For any attempt to interpret the Homeric Greek notion of human excellence in terms of virtue, especially if one hears this word in its typical Christian or even Roman overtones, is bound to go astray. Excellence in the Greek sense involves neither the Christian notion of humility and love, nor the Roman ideal of stoic adherence to one's duty. Instead, excellence in the Homeric world depends crucially on one's sense of gratitude and wonder. Nietzsche was one of the first to understand that Homeric excellence bears little resemblance to modern moral agency. His view was that the Homeric world understood nobility in terms of the overpowering strength of noble warriors. The effect of the ensuing Judeo-Christian tradition on this Nietzschean reading was to enfeeble the Homeric understanding of excellence by substituting the meekness of the lamb for the strength and power of the noble warrior. Nietzsche was certainly right that the Homeric tradition valorizes the strong, noble hero. And he was right, too, that in some important sense, the Homeric account of excellence is foreign to our basic moralizing assumptions. But there is something that the Nietzschean account leaves out. As Bernard Knox emphasizes, the Greek word arete is etymologically related to the Greek verb to pray, areomai. It follows that Homer's basic account of human excellence involves the necessity of being in an appropriate relationship to whatever is understood to be sacred in the culture. Helen's greatness on this interpretation is not properly measured in terms of the degree to which she is morally responsible for her actions. What makes Helen great in Homer's world is her ability to live a life that is constantly responsive to golden Aphrodite, the shining example of the sacred erotic dimension of existence. Likewise, Achilles had a special kind of receptivity to Ares and his warlike way of life. Odysseus had Athena, with her wisdom and cultural adaptability, to look out for him. Presumably, the master craftsman of Homer's world worked in the light of Hephaestus's shining. In order to engage with this understanding of human excellence, we will have to think clearly about how the Homeric Greeks understood themselves. Why would it make sense to describe their lives in relation to the presence and absence of the gods? Several questions focus this kind of approach. What is the phenomenon that Homer is responding to when he says that a god intervened or in some way took part in an event or action? Is this phenomenon recognizable to us, even if only marginally? And if Homer's reference to the gods is something other than an attempt to pass off moral responsibility for one's actions, then what exactly is it? Only by facing these questions head on can we understand whether it is possible or desirable to lure back Homer's polytheistic gods. The gods are essential to the Homeric Greek understanding of what it is to be a human being at all. As Pisistratus, the son of wise old Nestor, says toward the beginning of the Odyssey, all men need the gods. The Greeks were deeply aware of the way in which our successes and our failures, indeed our very actions themselves, are never completely under our control. They were constantly sensitive to, amazed by, and grateful for those actions that one cannot perform on one's own, simply by trying harder. Going to sleep, waking up, fitting in, standing out, gathering crowds together, holding their attention with a speech, changing their mood, or indeed being filled with a longing, desire, courage, wisdom, and so on. Homer sees each of these achievements as a particular god's gift. To say that all men need the gods, therefore, is to say, at least in part, that we are the kinds of beings who are at our best when we find ourselves acting in ways that we cannot and ought not entirely take credit for. To say that all men need the gods, therefore, is to say, in part at least, that we are the kinds of beings who are at our best when we find ourselves acting in ways that we cannot and ought not entirely take credit for. There are many cautionary tales in Homer involving characters who try to take credit for favorable events that would properly have been experiences beyond their control. Consider the case of Ajax, for example. After fighting valiantly for the Greeks in the Trojan War, he met with difficulty on his voyage home. In the treacherous sea, his ships were dashed against the giant rocks of Gyrae, though Ajax himself somehow managed to escape. Quote, and he indeed would have evaded fate, had he not bragged with blinded heart. He said that he'd escaped the sea's abyss despite the gods. Poseidon heard Ajax rave. At once he gripped his trident in giant hands. He struck the rock of Gyrae and cracked it. One half stayed in place, but one split off, plunged down into the sea. That part was where the maddened, blustering Ajax sat. It bore him down into the boundless tide. And there, when he had drank much brine, he died. What are we supposed to make of such a story? Not that some theological entity named Poseidon played a genuine causal role in Ajax's death. That is not what we should hope to retrieve from the Greeks. Presumably, what happened to Ajax, after all, is that once his ship had been wrecked and he had climbed onto an enormous rock, an earthquake split the rock in two and sent him to his death. Whatever we retrieve from the Greeks, it must be consistent with our understanding of the physical makeup of the universe. The Greek position becomes interesting not when it is thought of as an alternative to our causal explanation of events, but rather when it offers a fresh account of our particular human kind of excellence. Indeed, eloquently articulated in the Ajax story is a view of what we ought to aspire to as human beings. At its heart is the idea that there is something deeply wrong about Ajax's attitude in this situation. So wrong that it is an affront to our self-conception, and that in some sense it explains and justifies his death. Instead of blindly and selfishly taking credit for his escape in such a view, Ajax should have been grateful that things turned out as favorably as they did. Gratitude, not braggadocio, is the appropriate response to a happy event. Indeed, gratitude is more than simply the appropriate response in Homer's world. It is essential to a well-lived life. After all, to explain Ajax's demise in terms of his self-conceit, as Homer does, is to insist that his reaction was an affront to everything the Greeks held sacred. That's what it means to say that Poseidon struck him down. For Homer, the death of Ajax made sense only in the context of Ajax's utter rejection of anything sacred. So a certain kind of gratitude becomes an essential component in the Homeric understanding of the best possible life. In one sense, then, the gods are whatever stands beyond us that requires our gratitude. The demand for this kind of gratitude is rather marginal in the modern world, but the basic phenomenon that motivates this idea is nevertheless recognizable to us. Imagine an Ajax-like character who survives the sinking of the Titanic. He's the guy who sees evidence of his own greatness in the fact that he was picked up by the rescue boat. Something in this rankles, even now. Although it is not at the center of our conception of ourselves, the idea that we should recognize and be grateful for favorable events when they occur is not entirely alien to us. The Greeks experienced this phenomenon in a particular way, however. It was not just that they felt lucky when something they experienced to be beyond their control turned out well for them. It was that they experienced these favorable events as meaningful for and directed at them. To see this point, consider the difference between the Homeric Greeks and the Romans living in the 2nd and 1st centuries BC. The Romans took very seriously the importance of luck in their lives, and they personified this force in the goddess Fortuna, often represented as blind, indicating that her choices are indifferent to those whom they affect. Fortuna has no natural precursor in the Homeric world. The goddess Tyche, who is typically considered the Greek equivalent of Fortuna, doesn't begin to play an important role in Greek mythology until the Hellenistic age, at least 500 years after Homer. The distinction between Fortuna and the Homeric Greek gods is important. If fortune shines upon a Roman citizen, then the proper sentiment is not gratitude, since fortune didn't have him in view at all. Rather, to experience one's life as ruled by fortune is at best to cultivate a kind of stoicism and reserve. The Roman Stoic stalwartly endures the vicissitudes of life, inoculating himself against fortunes and misfortunes alike. This kind of reserve, of willfully enforced detachment, could not be further from the Homeric conception of excellence in a life. And yet there is something familiar about it in our secular age. The notion that blind luck determines the course of our lives leads quickly to the nihilistic idea that our lives have no meaning. Roman Stoicism is grandfather to the nihilism of the secular age. The connection between luck and meaninglessness is a theme tailor-made for the contemporary world. Woody Allen seems to be exploring this connection in his 2005 movie, Match Point. In the film, Chris Wilton is a social climbing tennis instructor at a high-end London club. The opening scene of the movie shows a static image of a tennis ball suspended just above the net, as Wilson explains his philosophy of life in a voiceover. Quote, "The man who said, 'I'd rather be lucky than good,' saw deeply into life. People are afraid to face how great a part of life is dependent on luck. It's scary to think so much is out of one's control. There are moments in a match when the ball hits the top of the net, and for a split second, it can either go forward or fall back. With a little luck, it goes forward and you win. Or maybe it doesn't and you lose." As the movie proceeds, Wilton becomes involved in a love triangle that he escapes by murdering the less convenient of his two girlfriends. The question that motivates the story is whether he will be caught. Wilton himself recognizes what's at stake. Quote, "It would be fitting if I were apprehended and punished. At least there would be some small sign of justice, some small measure of hope for the possibility of meaning." The possibility of meaning, however, is cut short by sheer luck, of the sort exemplified by the chance event of a tennis ball on the top of the net. Another man is arrested for Wilton's crimes. It follows, with the force of a syllogism, that there's no hope for the possibility of meaning in our lives. By emphasizing life's dependence on luck, Allen is committed to nihilism. Being lucky and being cared for are radically different phenomena. If we experience blind luck to be the source of whatever is beyond our control, as the Romans did, then it makes no sense to feel grateful for the favorable things that happen. The cost, however, is a kind of detachment from the world that makes it impossible to experience meaning in our lives. The Greeks, by contrast, held the world in constant wonder. They could not help but be amazed and grateful whenever anything favorable happened in their lives. This kind of amazement and wonder, and the gratitude that follows naturally from it, is the key to everything sacred in the world of the Greeks. To understand better the Greek sense of the sacred, let us consider an example in which it seems natural to Homer to invoke the presence of the gods. In a representative scene toward the end of the Odyssey, the suitors throw a host of spears at Odysseus from point-blank range. Homer describes the event. Quote, "Again, 6 suitors cast their shafts with force, but each shot missed its mark. Athena's work." The idea here is that it must not have seemed merely arbitrary or fortunate to Odysseus that these enemy spears missed their mark. It must have seemed to him, rather, that there was some meaning or purpose in this fact, that he was being cared for in the event. Homer's way of expressing this is to insist that the spears missed Odysseus because Athena was protecting him from the enemy attack. There is something one can retrieve from this description and something one cannot. Obviously, we cannot believe that some supernatural entity named Athena actually caused the spears to turn aside. Even if we replace Athena with the Judeo-Christian god, our secular age typically rebels at the thought, though some, of course, will admit this possibility. But whatever the precise metaphysical and theological facts, let us focus on the phenomenology of the situation. Imagine yourself, for the moment, in Odysseus's place. 6 of your enemies have amassed before you at close range. Each picks up a spear, and together they hurl them at you all at once. You are prepared, as the great warrior always is, to die a heroic death in the following instant. Indeed, it looks inevitable. But instead, quote, one spearhead struck the sturdy hall's doorpost, and one the tightly fitted door itself. Two other ashwood shafts, tipped with stout bronze, just struck the wall. And though two shafts drew close, they leveled nothing more than glancing blows. What relief, what amazement, what gratitude one must feel. And can it possibly have been blind chance? By any natural measure, it must seem to Odysseus things should have gone the other way. By any natural measure, it must seem to Odysseus things should have gone the other way. One experiences this, or at least Homer's character experienced it, not just as mere luck or good fortune, but as an event that tells him he is well cared for. Athena's work indeed. Although we're not likely to attribute events like this to the work of a god, there is nevertheless something familiar in Odysseus's way of experiencing the situation. Those who escape natural disasters or other dangerous situations, for example, often do feel that it was not a mere accident that they were saved. Indeed, it is sometimes difficult when one is the target of a statistically unlikely event, synchronicity, to feel otherwise. Sorry, but yeah, the connection is over to the playlist on Cosmos and Psyche and the significance of implications of synchronicity in the context of this kind of revisioning of history. Let's continue. Consider a scene from the movie Pulp Fiction, which provides a contemporary version of the Odysseus event. Jules and Vincent, played by Samuel L. Jackson and John Travolta, are hitmen sent to retrieve a package for their boss. At an apartment, they find three of the men who've stolen the package, but are surprised by a fourth man hiding in the bathroom. The fourth man, also 3 and 4, by the way, but I won't go on about that. The fourth man charges out, silver magnum raised, firing 6 booming shots from his hand cannon. Amazingly, none of them hits the mark. Jules, obviously shaken by the event, sits down in a chair. Quote, Jules to himself, we should be fucking dead right now. Pause. Did you see that gun he fired at us? It was bigger than him. We should be fucking dead. Vincent. Yeah, we were lucky. Jules rises, moving towards Vincent. Jules. That shit wasn't luck. That shit was something else. Vincent prepares to leave. Vincent. Yeah, maybe. Jules. That was divine intervention. You know what divine intervention is? Vincent. Yeah, I think so. That means God came down from heaven and stopped the bullets. Jules. Yeah, man, that's what it means. That's exactly what it means. God came down from heaven and stopped the bullets. Vincent. I think we should be going now. Jules. Don't do that. Don't you fucking do that. Don't blow this shit off. What just happened was a fucking miracle. Vincent. Chill the fuck out, Jules. This shit happens. Jules. Wrong. This shit doesn't just happen. Vincent. Do you want to continue this theological discussion in the car or at the jailhouse with the cops? Jules, we should be fucking dead right now, my friend. We just witnessed a miracle and I want you to fucking acknowledge it. Vincent, okay, man, it was a miracle. Can we leave now? Notice also the matrix resonance with coming down from heaven and stopping the bullets. Neo as the one, as in Neoplatonism. The events of this scene are strikingly similar to those in Homer, right down to the number of projectiles launched. And Jules's understanding of the situation is very much like Odysseus's. Neither can help but experience his survival as something more than blind chance. But there are differences. For one thing, in the contemporary version of the scene, there is another explanation possible. Vincent provides the modern counterpoint to the story, seeing the event as nothing more than a statistical fluke. Chill the fuck out, Jules, he says. This shit happens. Like the Roman citizen invoking blind Fortuna, Vincent can see no motivation for Jules' gratitude. After all, he must be thinking, the flip of a fair coin plays no favorites. Sometimes things just work out well. It's probably fair to say that Vincent's experience of the situation is canonical for our secular age. Having rejected the metaphysical notion that a superordinary being can have any kind of causal effect, it can seem obvious to the contemporary agent that gratitude in such a situation is superfluous. Indeed, the feeling of gratitude can even seem metaphysically irresponsible. Nevertheless, it does sometimes happen, even in our secular age, that one is overwhelmed by such a feeling. When this happens, as it does for Jules, another difference between us and the Greeks stands out. It is a kind of revelation for him that changes the way he understands himself and the world. For Odysseus, by contrast, it is the only explanation possible. Further comment is odious. A simple Athena's work will do. If our modern age has two possible interpretations of the event, it is natural for us to want to know which is right, or which elements of each are right. Quote, why did the bullets miss their mark? We want to know. Was Vincent right that it was a mere statistical aberration? Or was Jules right that it was an act of grace? The answer to this question is crucial for determining how seriously we can relate to Homer's world. One way of hearing the question is metaphysical. Is there an entity, it seems to be asking, like the Judeo-Christian God, for example, who is the source of such a providential act? If there is, then Jules is right to have the reaction he does. If not, then Vincent has the upper hand. This version of the question is a distraction, for the real issue is not primarily metaphysical. It's not, in other words, about whether God or gods exist as supernatural entities, or what their various properties are. Rather, the real question is phenomenological. It is about what ways of experiencing the world and of understanding ourselves have underwritten those further metaphysical and theological claims. The question that really matters, in other words, is not whether God was the causal agent, but whether gratitude was an appropriate response. Why is this a relevant question? Well, it helps to keep in mind the issue that we're trying to address. The nihilism of our secular age leaves us with the awful sense that nothing matters in the world at all. If nothing matters, then there is no basis for doing any one thing over any other, and the contemporary burden of choice weighs heavily. The main question for the secular age is how to relieve ourselves of this burden. Now, Odysseus lived in a world in which this burden had no place. The Homeric conception of a human being, and especially of excellence in human life, did not allow for it. So the real question is what that notion of excellence amounts to, and whether any version of it is livable today. This might seem a dodge. After all, we have claimed already that the Homeric notion of arete involves getting in the right relation to the gods. Isn't such a project predicated on the belief that the gods exist? Well, yes and no. It might be natural to say that the Greeks themselves believed in the gods. This is an historical question about which we make no commitments. But what is truly important is that the Greeks felt that excellence in a life requires highlighting a central fact of existence. Wonderful things, or horrible things, outside of your control are constantly happening for you. That background sense of human existence is what justified and reinforced the feeling of gratitude that was so central to the Homeric understanding of what is admirable in a life. Whether that gratitude is directed towards Athena, Jesus, Vishnu, or nobody at all is almost irrelevant. So let us return to Vincent and Jules. Each of them has escaped death in a quite astonishing way. The question is what the appropriate response to this astonishing event should be. Vincent is unmoved, explaining it as a mere statistical aberration. Jules, by contrast, sees some meaning in the event and is overwhelmed by a sense of gratitude. Which of these responses is more attractive, more in tune with our aspirations as human beings? When put this way, we can see that the question is trickier. It amounts to something like the following. Is it better to be completely indifferent when events beyond my control turn out favorably for me? Or is it rather that the gratitude many people spontaneously feel in such situations is not only appropriate, but somehow to be cultivated and valorized? Which conception of ourselves is the one we are called to cultivate? Our claim is that gratitude is the more fitting response. In Homer's world, lack of gratitude is one of the surest signs that a character is deficient. We've already seen that Homer explains Ajax's death in terms of his self-satisfaction and lack of gratitude. But this theme returns several times in the Homeric works. Perhaps the most important example is found in the behavior of Penelope's suitors. While Odysseus is away from home, a number of the Ithacan princes grow determined to marry his wife Penelope and thereby come into possession of Odysseus's estate. At the beginning of the Odyssey, a large group of these men, collectively called the suitors, has descended upon Odysseus's household to court his wife. Homer describes the suitors in a range of unflattering ways, making it clear that they act with no respect for the laws and customs of the land. Abusive guests at Odysseus's home, they voraciously consume his food, drink his wine, and generally make a nuisance of themselves. Furthermore, they do all this while attempting to usurp his kingdom, seduce his servants, and steal his wife. The suitors are in no way admirable men. If Odysseus is a paradigm of excellence in Homer's world, therefore, the suitors are something like its opposite. For this reason, it is interesting to see how Homer describes their faults. Eumaeus, Odysseus's loyal swineherd, begins the story. Quote, all they want is to prey on my master's estate. Proud dogs, they stop at nothing. They make butchery of our beeves and swine. As we're swilling down wine, they drink us dry. Only a great domain like his could stand it. Eumaeus is clearly outraged by the suitors, and sure enough, we moderns recognize their behavior as outrageous too. To us, it seems outrageous, not least because it is unfair, ungenerous, and lacking in respect for the property of others. No doubt we have other explanations as well. But what justifies the outrage in Homer's view is not any of these things, or even anything like them. Rather, the suitor's behavior is despicable in Homer's world because it shows a lack of respect for the gods. In Eumaeus's description, it shows that the suitors are, quote, cold-hearted men who never spare a thought for how they stand in the sight of Zeus. One feature of the suitors' lack of respect for the gods is found in their, quote, arrogant or unconstrained bearing. Quote, the blessed gods are fond of no wrongdoing, but honor discipline and right behavior, according to Eumaeus. So, failing to act in accordance with the laws and customs of Ithaca, as the suitors do in their arrogance, is itself an affront to the gods. A further indication of their lack of respect, however, is that the suitors are almost never shown making sacrifices to the gods. At a psychological level, the ritual act of sacrificing the fattest cow or the choicest goat was probably motivated by the idea that some supernatural being would enjoy the feast. Perhaps there was even some thought of a quid pro quo. If we give you this nice, tasty cow, O super being, will you please treat us well? Obviously, none of these psychological motivations is recoverable by us today. But there is a deeper significance to the ritual sacrifice as well, one that is tied to the importance of wonder and gratitude in Homer's world. The Greeks themselves probably didn't understand this deep connection, but it was built into the practices of the culture in which they lived. The Greeks themselves probably didn't understand this deep connection, but it was built into the practices of the culture in which they lived. Ritual sacrifice is so important in Homer's world, not just because it is a way of communicating the sense of gratitude that the best people already naturally and appropriately feel. It is, moreover, a way of bringing about that sense of gratitude in people who don't already have it or don't have it enough, and reinforcing it in those who do. If performed properly and regularly, in other words, ritual sacrifice of this sort not only expresses gratitude, it induces it. The proper performance of the ritual is therefore motivated by, but also reinforces and strengthens, a deep commitment to the basic Homeric sense of the sacred. That it is the highest form of human excellence to recognize, be amazed by, and be grateful for whatever it is that draws you to act at your best. In Homer's world, of course, the ritual sacrifice was literally a sacrifice of something. It typically involved the slaying or burning of a valuable animal, and in some cases, the slaying of many animals. The sacrifice of a hecatomb, which Homer mentions over a dozen times in the Odyssey, is literally and properly the slaying of 100 oxen. But perhaps more importantly, the ritual sacrifice was a sacrifice for the participants. In sacrificing, they offer up something deeply valuable to them. To make such a sacrifice willingly, and to do so motivated by the idea that such an act is noble and good, is not just a nice thing to do, it is essential for human excellence in Homer's world. We understand this mood of gratitude better in its absence, and that is why the suitors are a helpful case. The gratitude that motivates the ritual act of sacrifice, and that is reinforced by it, is incompatible with the kind of self-satisfaction and arrogance the suitors display. The phenomena of gratitude and wonder form the background to Homer's entire understanding of human existence. Homer finds things to wonder at and be grateful for that our modern theories almost necessarily cover up. Take one of the simplest examples, sleep. In the Iliad, sleep is himself a god, at least once addressed as the lord of all gods and of all men. In the Odyssey, however, as we've seen, sleep is primarily a power that other gods have to give. In the opening book of the Odyssey, Penelope weeps and weeps for her husband Odysseus until Athena, grey-eyed goddess, sheds sweet sleep upon her eyelids. And later in the poem, the messenger god Hermes is revealed to carry a wand, quote, wherewith he lulls to sleep the eyes of whom he will, while others again he awakens, even out of slumber. Even when the gods are not explicitly responsible for someone's going to sleep, however, Homer's way of describing the event is deeply informed by his understanding of human beings as not fully in control of certain aspects of their existence. We have seen already the extraordinary range of ways in which Homer has to describe the phenomena of being drawn into and awakened from sleep. In Homer, people do not just go to sleep. as if that was something one could do. Sleep itself is a sacred gift. The variety of ways Homer has of describing sleep indicates what an important role it plays in his conception of human existence. For us, sleep is the blank episode that separates our moments of activity. When we are sleeping, we are no longer quite ourselves. By contrast, in Homer's world, sleep is an event that epitomizes the human condition. It is often in sleep that the gods visit humans, give them direction and purpose, formulate their plans for them, quell their anxieties, and refresh their desires. Sleep is a canonical human event in Homer because it is the paradigm of an activity at which one cannot succeed by trying harder. And yet one is not completely powerless in the face of it either. One can prepare oneself for sleep, be grateful that it comes, wonder at the transformation it brings about. And all these, for Homer, are characteristic of us at our best. Homer finds this particular kind of human excellence almost everywhere he looks. Sometimes it occurs in the context of heroic activity. In one episode, after a shipwreck, Odysseus has been tossed about for 2 days and 2 nights, alone on a single plank of wood in the middle of the sea. Finally, he spies a shoreline, but the situation is treacherous. Quote, "There were no harbors where a ship might ride, no havens and no coves, just jagged reefs and jutting crags. Odysseus's knees were weak, went weak, his heart was hesitant." It is not difficult to imagine the dismay one might feel in such a situation. To stay at sea is to perish of starvation, or drowning or exposure. To seek land is to risk being dashed upon the jagged rocks. No wonder Homer has Odysseus talking to himself. Quote, "His mind and spirit pondering." And yet, while he's busy despairing of his options, quote, "A heavy surge was taking him, in fact, straight on the rocks. He had been flayed there, and his bones broken, had not grey-eyed Athena instructed him. Both hands were put in motion to grab a rock ledge as it was passing, and he held on, groaning, as the surge went by." Homer has a sterling grasp of what it is to be in a situation like this. In particular, Homer's Odyssey, like the modern-day heroes we saw in the opening chapter, refuses to take credit for the action performed. After all, he was busy pondering and despairing of his fate. His hands did reach out for the rock and grab it, to be sure. But from Odysseus' point of view, they were put in motion, motivated by a force outside himself. Grey-eyed Athena. Homer describes an array of situations in which something outside our control evokes, or ought properly to evoke, a kind of amazement and gratitude from us. When a stranger offers assistance, on Homer's account, it's almost always a god or goddess in disguise. When, in a particularly critical instance, someone's speech moves the public to your side, that too is a god or goddess looking over you. Even when men are gathered at a council, if it really matters and everyone shows up, Homer cannot resist the idea that a god or goddess did the job. To say this is not to engage with any fancy metaphysical claims. After all, in each of these cases, a real person, the stranger, the public speaker, the herald, is involved as well. Rather, to say that a god is behind each event is to emphasize that gratitude and amazement are the appropriate response. The gods play other roles as well. Sometimes the presence of a god in Homer is simply an indication that human existence at its best is on display. We've already seen the case of heroic action in this regard, but there are simpler cases too. Sometimes a god is involved, for example, when a person simply stands out, shines, as we sometimes say, in the way that a truly charismatic person might. Consider the scene in which Odysseus is preparing to visit the king of the Phaeacians. Quote, Athena, the grey-eyed goddess, made him more robust and taller. She gave him thicker hair, which flowed down from his head in curls and clusters that seemed much like the hyacinth in flower. Just as a craftsman who has learned his secrets from both the grey-eyed goddess and Hephaestus frames silver with fine gold, and thus creates a work with greater plenitude and grace, so did the goddess now enhance with grace the head and shoulders of Odysseus. Then by the sea he sat apart, a man handsome and radiant. The Greek word for grace here is charis, which is the root for our word charismatic. Literally, a charismatic person is one who has been favored by the gods with a gift of grace or talent. The charismatic person lights up a room, as for instance, the great Russian ballet dancer Nureyev was said to do. In his description of a scene at Andy Warhol's factory, Stephen Holder describes Nureyev's effect. Quote, I remember watching the dancer strut out of the elevator, the quintessence of princely hauteur, with an entourage of handsome young men. Under the blaze of his charisma, the party's three other star guests, Montgomery Clift, Julie Garland, and Tennessee Williams, seemed to wilt as they huddled together on the couch, looking intimidated and rather wrecked. The three other guests were no shrinking violence. Beautiful and famous alike, at the height of their careers and with plenty of star power among them, they might easily have held center court in some other situation. But like Odysseus under the favor of Athena, Nureyev's charisma was palpable. He stood taller, smelt better, walked prouder, and simply outshone all the others around him. If Homer had written this scene, then the facts would have been the same. But to emphasize Nureyev's effortless charisma, something given to rather than manufactured by him, Homer would no doubt have said that grace was showered upon him as the gift of a god. That description highlights something crucial about the scene. For what is essential in all these examples is that one cannot achieve the result by trying harder. The person who tries to be charismatic inevitably comes off as a preening oaf. The person who deliberately reaches for the rock is likely to shred himself to bits. The person who tries desperately to go to sleep is guaranteed to have a long night of sleeplessness before him. Homer says, Athena enhanced Odysseus with grace, because it is something Odysseus could not have done for himself. One does not have to believe that the Greek gods actually exist in order to gain something deep and important from Homer's sense of the sacred. One does, however, have to reject the modern idea that to be a human agent is to be the sole source of one's actions. Because this modern notion of human agency is so pervasive, it can lead us to act in ways that hide the phenomena that Homer was sensitive to. To see this, let us explore briefly the modern view. It is natural and intuitive to us, indeed almost an axiomatic truth of our modern existence, to think that a human should be criticized if he fails to take responsibility for his actions. Human actions just are, in the modern conception, behaviors for which the human agent is responsible. In the middle of the 20th century, the French philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre worked out the logical extension of this view in his existentialist philosophy. Quote, the first effect of existentialism, Sartre writes, is that it puts every man in possession of himself as he is. The modern view that we are entirely responsible for our existence stands in radical contrast with the Homeric idea that we act at our best when we open ourselves to the world, allowing ourselves to be drawn from without. Indeed, once we see the force of this contrast, it becomes obvious why the central Homeric phenomena are hard to find in our modern world. What Homer considers to be the paradigm of excellence seems to us hardly to count as human action at all. If we are to take seriously the Homeric notion of excellence, then we will have to give up the modern notion that we are fully responsible for our actions. Fully responsible. There are reasons to think this is a good idea. Consider Chuck Knobloch, literally Knoblauch, Knobloch, the infamous second baseman for the New York Yankees. Once considered to be one of the game's best fielders, Knobloch developed severe and inexplicable throwing problems in 1999. He became incapable of accurately making the short throw from second to first. Once, an errant throw sailed into the stands, hitting sportscaster Keith Olbermann's mother in the face. Knobloch worked desperately on his throwing, but the more attention he paid to it, the worse the problem got. In Homer's terminology, as we shall see, Knobloch was interfering with the gods. The phenomenon is more common than you think. It occurs in sports like baseball, golf, tennis, football. Quarterbacks are not immune, and it's commonly called the yips. The standard explanation is that the athlete begins to get in the way of his body's finely honed ability to act of its own accord. Instead of letting the activity be drawn out of him, Knobloch was attempting to generate the throw deliberately. Dr. Sean Harvey, a psychiatrist who has worked with pro athletes and is considered an expert in the area of sports psychology, comments on this phenomenon. Quote, they start to overthink something that should be really reflexive. They begin to take too much time to consider all the machinations that go with that. It destroys their ability to do what they've been practicing for so long. The idea is that when you have a highly honed skill, when you are in the zone, when your actions flow out of you rather than being generated by you, then you're acting at your best. The worst thing you can do in this kind of situation is to get in the way of whatever is going on. If we think of ourselves as the sole and self-sufficient source of our activity, as we tend to do in the contemporary world, then it's difficult to imagine any response to Knobloch's situation other than the one he chose, to focus more clearly and more deliberately on the action he is performing in order to perform it better. Indeed, the psychologist's analysis that this amounts to overthinking can sound almost paradoxical. How can thinking more and more clearly about what one is doing ever lead to anything but an improvement? But if one thinks, as Homer does, that human action at its finest belongs to the domain of the gods, a domain that is necessarily beyond our ken, then it will seem obvious that trying to get clear about the situation will lead to an unattractive result. This is the aspect of the phenomenon that Homer has squarely in focus. Let us take a look at his version of the story. When Odysseus finally returns to his home island of Ithaca, he is reunited with his son Telemachus. Together with Athena's help, they devise a plan to defeat the suitors, remove all the weapons from the great hall, and store them in a locked closet, to which only they have access. In the dark of night, Odysseus and Telemachus set about their task. Quote, the two, Odysseus and his noble son, sprang up to gather helmets, shields embossed, and spears with beechwood shafts. Then they went off. Athena lit the way. She held up high a golden lamp. She shed entrancing light. At that, Telemachus cried suddenly, my eyes, dear father, see a prodigy. The walls, the handsome panels, fir crossbeams, the towering pillars are so bright. They seem as if they had been lit by blazing flames. Some god, of those who rule high heaven, must have come to us. Odysseus stopped his son. Be silent, curb your thoughts, do not ask questions. This is the work of the Olympians. Perhaps this is a lesson about the sacred that we are now in a position to appreciate. When things are going at their best, when we are the most excellent version of ourselves that we can be, when we are, for instance, working together with others as one, when we are, for instance, working together with others as one, then our activity seems to be drawn out of us by an external force. These are shining moments in life, wondrous moments that require our gratitude. In those episodes of excellence, no matter the domain, Odysseus's voice should ring through our heads. Be silent, curb your thoughts, do not ask questions. This is the work of the Olympians. The Homeric Greeks were open to the world in a way that we can barely understand. With all our modern skill for introspecting our inner states, we tend to think of the best human activities as those that are thought through internally, completely, and well. We even tend to think of our moods as private inner experiences to which others have no access. The Greeks, by contrast, experienced themselves as empty heads turned toward the world. The very idea of an inner experience was surprising and bizarre to them. Homer, for example, was amazed that Odysseus could keep his feelings hidden from others. At one point in the Odyssey, Odysseus has returned home to Ithaca and met with his wife Penelope. Because he is not ready to reveal his identity to her yet, he pretends to be an old friend of Odysseus's and tells her of their last encounter. Hearing the stories of her husband, Penelope bursts into tears. It's hard for Odysseus to see his dear wife in such a state, but he cannot show her how much he is moved for fear of giving away his identity. Homer marvels at his ability to conceal his sadness in this situation. He speaks with awe of that master of invention, who has the trick of weeping inwardly while his eyes remain as dry as bone. Quote, imagine how his heart ached for his lady, his wife in tears, and yet he never blinked. His eyes might have been made of horn or iron, for all that she could see. He had this trick, wept, if he willed to, inwardly. The idea of an inward experience was so peculiar to the Greeks that they even experienced their dreams as occurring out in the world. When a god visits someone in a dream, for example, she is experienced as slipping through a crack in the doorway, gliding through the room, standing at the bedside of the dreamer, and speaking to him there. In general, the Homeric Greeks had almost no sense of an inner life of the sort that seems so obvious to us. Dreams, feelings, and especially moods for the Homeric Greeks were not experienced as occurring in individual minds at all. Rather, moods were public and shared, and people felt themselves swept up in a shared mood, like drops of water in a hurricane. Repeat that. Dreams, feelings, and especially moods for the Homeric Greeks were not experienced as occurring in individual minds at all. Rather, moods were public and shared. And people felt themselves swept up in a shared mood, like drops of water in a hurricane. For Homer, moods were important because they illuminated a shared situation. That is, they manifested what currently mattered, and they thereby drew people to perform heroic and passionate deeds. Aphrodite, as we've seen, established a mood that attuned those in a shared situation exclusively to its erotic possibilities. Other gods established other moods. To say the gods are the attuning ones is to say they are whatever it is that is responsible for there being a way that things already matter to us, and whatever it is that calls us to get in tune with that. If the gods are the attuning ones, then the essence of human greatness for Homer was to let oneself be attuned to the moods a god set for a situation. But moods do not last forever. They well up, hold one for a while, and finally let one go. Physis, is the Greek name for this transient character of moods and mattering. And the idea that moods are transient in this way is crucial for Homer's kind of polytheism. Perhaps the most notable fact about Homer's world is that it comprises an entire pantheon of gods. Each of these gods focuses a mood and a set of practices that sustains it. And each is a shining exemplar of the most excellent way of life in his or her domain. Human beings at their best are open to being swept up and held for a while by one or another of these world-defining moods. But the fact that there is a pantheon of gods, rather than a single one, indicates that there is no underlying principle that unifies their different ways of life. Excellence in the erotic domain of Aphrodite, for example, is simply incommensurate with excellence in Hera's domestic world. Because the Greeks understood human excellence in terms of being open to divine moods, and because these moods are transient, there is no motivation in Greek existence to reconcile the meanings that the various gods illuminate. This polytheistic plurality of incommensurate gods makes sense of Helen's ability to move seamlessly between her domestic life with Menelaus and her erotic life with Paris. She feels no call to reconcile or rank these understandings of herself, but instead remains open to being swept into each. In this, Homer says, she is shining among women. We began this chapter with Helen's dinner party tale of running off with Paris. Though it seems shocking to us that she would recite such a story, even Menelaus found it wonderful. The disparity between our reaction and Homer's to such an event brings into focus the ancient Greek receptivity to a plurality of incompatible gods. It led to our asking what phenomenon Homer is responding to when he says that a god took part in an action or event. No doubt there are many possible answers to this question. And there are no doubt also many cases in which no real phenomena is playing a role at all. There is a whole soap opera of events that occurs on Mount Olympus, for example, that is irrelevant to what we can hope to retrieve from Homer's work. But it is clear that Homer invokes the gods in order to account for the observation that a central form of human excellence must be drawn from without. A central form of human excellence must be drawn from without. A god, in Homer's terminology, is a mood that attunes us to what matters most in a situation, allowing us to respond appropriately without thinking. This Homeric conception of the gods puts other demands on the well-lived life. For if the best kind of human life requires the presence of the gods, then the best kinds of human beings must invite the gods by expressing wonder and gratitude in their presence. To develop an appreciation, therefore, for those situations in life when favorable things occur out of our control, and to develop a sense of wonder and gratitude in the face of such situations, this too is required for a life well lived. When we develop in ourselves the ability for this kind of wonder and gratitude, then we become a standing invitation to the gods. With this account of excellence in mind, let us return to the question of why Helen was such a revered figure in the Homeric texts. Homer's Greeks were brought to a state of reverential awe when they were in the presence of anything that was beautiful in the highest degree. Standing in the presence even of beautiful, well-crafted things inspired them to sacred wonder. Consider, for example, Telemachus's description of Menelaus' extraordinary palace. Quote, "My dear friend, can you believe your eyes? The murmuring hall, how luminous it is with bronze, gold, amber, silver, and ivory. This is the way the court of Zeus must be inside, upon Olympus. What a wonder." The word that is translated wonder here, sebas in the Greek, literally implies the sacred phenomena of reverence, worship, and honor as well. It is used in Homer to indicate that one cannot help but to stand in awe before something sacred. Indeed, the literal translation of the phrase is something like, quote, "Wonder holds me as I look upon this." Our world, our word beautiful, therefore, does not properly convey the kind of sacred feeling that the Greeks felt before the finest things. In fact, it is trivializing merely to say that Helen was the most beautiful woman in the world. Indeed, her standard epithet is Dia Gunaikon, which literally means a goddess among women. But really, we have to say something even more than that. Helen is the embodiment of Eros. Indeed, she is so above all others in this sacred domain that she is considered a daughter of Zeus himself. To say that the erotic dimension of existence is sacred in Homer's world is to say that it immediately inspires gratitude and wonder in all the noblest human beings. Eros is not just physical or sensual pleasure in Homer's Greece. Rather, it is an entire way of being drawn. Rather, it is an entire way of being that draws the best kinds of people naturally to one another. A way of being that is overseen by golden Aphrodite herself. And Helen is the epitome of that sacred dimension of life. In this domain, all other women in Homer's world are measured against her. Helen is a site of erotic attractiveness in the effortless way that Nureyev was a charismatic force. Noble people are drawn to her inexorably. Noble people are drawn to her inexorably. Beautiful things gather round her naturally, and everything about her, from her way of talking to her way of carrying herself to her way of interacting with others, manifests the paradigm of excellence in this erotic domain. This is the Helen who is shining among women. Homer understands this at the deepest level. Consider, for example, the description of Helen's initial entrance in Book 4 of the Odyssey. Homer emphasizes not only how beautiful Helen is, but how beautiful the things surrounding her are. Extraordinary gifts from mystical places that others have been inspired to give her, like everything in her presence, seem to shimmer and glow. She, like Nureyev, travels with an entourage of beautiful attendants who add to the sense that she is the shining center of Eros. Notice the attention to detail in Homer's description. Quote, Helen came out of her scented chamber, a moving grace like Artemis, straight as a shaft of gold. Beside her came Adraste to place her armchair, Alcippe with a rug of downy wool, and Philo bringing a silver basket, once given by Alcandre, the wife of Polybos, in the treasure city, Thebes of distant Egypt. He gave 2 silver bathtubs to Menelaus and a pair of tripods, with 10 pure gold bars. And she, then, made these beautiful gifts to Helen, a golden distaff, and the silver basket rimmed in hammered gold, with wheels to run on. So Philo rolled it in to stand beside her, heaped with fine spun stuff, and cradled on it the distaff swathed in dusky violet wool. Reclining in her light chair with its footrest, Helen gazed at her husband and spoke. Helen is beautiful, yes, but more than that, she allows everyone else in the culture to understand what beauty is. To measure Helen's action, therefore, by some distinct standard of moral responsibility is not just wrong. In Homer's world, it is completely anathema. It reduces Helen's beauty to a subsidiary fact about her, inessential in comparison to the moral value of her action. If Helen's running off with Paris is an attunement to Eros in Homer's world, it would have been understood as a sacred act of the most excellent kind, holding oneself open to be drawn by Aphrodite's call. Furthermore, it is clear that the Greeks understood it that way. It is true that running off with Paris caused the Trojan War. But that is not lamentable in Homer's world. It's just the way life is. Indeed, it even creates opportunities for other kinds of excellence and nobility. The great Greek warrior Achilles, for example, was so heroic in battle that even when he was alive, he was honored as a deity. His heroic feats were so extraordinary that they set the standard for excellence in the domain of the heroic warrior, another sacred dimension in Homeric Greece. And even though he died while still young, these feats justified his life as among the best conceivable in Homer's world. As Odysseus tells him, when they meet in the underworld, quote, Achilles, neither past nor future holds a man more blessed than you. Indeed, the very sorrows of existence have their meaning in Homer's world, precisely because of the kinds of excellence they bring about. Odysseus himself, a great hero of the age, is a man who has endured much suffering. And as the great Phaeacian king, Alcinous, says about Odysseus' sorrows, quote, the gods brought this about. For men they wove the web of suffering, that men to come might have a theme to sing. Helen's running away with Paris, therefore, was regrettable, but it was not an irresponsible moral act. Indeed, it was not an act in the moral dimension at all. Rather, it was an act of sacred eros, weaving together both wonder and woe, that men to come might have a theme to sing. So that was chapter 3 in All Things Shining. Hubert Dreyfus and Sean Dorrance Kelly. And I think that speaks for itself, so I will leave it at that.